Welcome to our first episode of Talking and Tacos, where we talk and eat tacos. I'm your host, Chris Olivarez. In the elevator, we're about to meet with Laphonza Butler for our first podcast. Production for the people. Our guest today is a partner at SCRB Strategies, a firm described as kingmaker for California's Democratic politicians. She recently served as a senior advisor to the Kamala Harris presidential campaign. Previously, she served as president of SEIU Local 2015, the largest local union in California, and as president of SEIU California State Council, where she led the successful fight to raise the state minimum wage to $15 an hour. She's been described as one of the national talents of a generation and as someone who can work a political meeting as if she's Neo in The Matrix. So we ordered some tacos from Guisados. If you're familiar, it's a local LA spot all over LA. This one's Boyle Heights specifically.
I'm gonna do the cheese thing.
Cheese thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna go straight for some meat.
Go for it.
All right, I'm gonna go.
Typical Olivarez. That cheese one is good. I appreciate a good taco.
I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Laphonza Butler.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm always surprised when I hear people's description of me. So glad to be here. Good to see you again.
Thank you for being here. Did we miss anything?
No. Well, you know what? The thing that I'm most interested in right now is being a mom and trying to get it right the first time, but who knows?
Yeah.
But I think that's the most important description of how I identify these days. Motherhood to a 5-year-old who is as independent as any person
her mother.
I know.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your early life, where you grew up, and kind of what led you to the path you're on now.
Look, I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, Magnolia, Mississippi. Shout out to South Pike Eagles. My dad was sick for my entire sort of childhood. He had heart disease. And so we spent a lot of time in Louisiana. I have half siblings that live in Baton Rouge, and my dad was hospitalized a lot in Ochsner Hospital in New Orleans. And so I'd like to say I grew up in both Louisiana and Mississippi, and had the sort of experience of having my life sort of informed by the politics of the region in which I lived. I went to a historically black college. I had college professors who were SNCC organizers and spent time in Macomb jails during Freedom Summer. I had professors who were, lawyers by training and who were adjudicating some of the biggest public education fights for historically black colleges at the time. And, that was a lot of what I was surrounded by. And so it's those sort of pioneers, sort of pre-generate of my prior generation, that sort of informed how I see the world, how I experience right and wrong, and how I try to fight for justice. And that's sort of what got me here. I thought I was going to be like them. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And sort of life just took me on a different path. I started working for SEIU 2 weeks after I graduated from college. Yeah. My first assignment for SEIU was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And for a poor kid that grew up in the South, having to go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin was a culture shock of all culture shocks. But again, another opportunity to sort of frame right and wrong for me, where Milwaukee at the time was categorized as one of the most segregated cities in the country. And I could see it live while I was talking to non-union home care workers. And different parts of Milwaukee were black communities, brown communities, underinvested, lacking adequate housing and jobs and economic opportunity, and they were looking for and trying to find political power and sort of power to change their circumstances through SEIU. And those are the kinds of things that sort of shaped how I came to California in 2009. after working for SEIU all over the country. There was an opportunity to try to make a difference with home care workers here in Los Angeles. And I was living in Baltimore at the time. I was National Property Services Division Director for SEIU, and I wanted a chance to come and try to be a part of the lives of workers who reminded me so much of my mom, who were caregivers and healthcare workers who were trying to find a better future for themselves and their children. And so that's what I got a chance to do, and I've been blessed. I really, really have been blessed to be able to work with and for everyday workers who were trying to make their lives better for the sake of their children.
That's amazing. You have quite a journey across the country.
Literally.
Literally across the country. Maybe you could tell us a little bit what you're working on now, currently.
I am back in California after a year working with Senator Harris, again, across the country, in her effort to be the next president of the United States. And so I'm back in Los Angeles, and there's always, the beautiful part about Los Angeles and about California, there's always lots of progressive initiatives happening, whether it's the fight for criminal justice reform or opportunities to elect progressive politicians, or there are just issue advocacy that's happening in communities that have been forgotten. One of the things that I'm working on right now is a project in Compton. Historically, Compton has been sort of disinvested, whether it's public dollars or philanthropic dollars. It's a city of 100,000 residents, now mostly Latino residents, where people would have assumed that Compton is a majority African-American community. Just as the demographics of Los Angeles writ large are changing, the demographics of Compton have changed as well. But the amazing thing about the city of Compton is there's 100,000 residents. There's one public library. In Compton, the city of Compton.
Wow.
Compton, according to the County Department of Public Health, Compton has some of the highest incidence of STIs, sexually transmitted infections, starting in middle school. And so a partner that I got very familiar with as working with SEIU was St. John's Well Child and Family Center. They are one of the largest health providers in the city of Compton, serving about 35% of Compton residents. And they want to launch a Healthy Compton campaign. And I want to continue my work to work with and for families, workers, communities that have been forgotten. Our kids deserve more than one library for every 100,000 residents.
It's how do you get away with that?
We got to ask ourselves that question. It's we can talk about Compton as it relates to movies and celebrities. But what about the kids that are there, whose lives are at stake, whose opportunities are arrested?
What kind of message are we sending to the kids?
What kind of message are we sending? One public library.
One, okay. So I'm glad you're working, on that campaign in Compton and with St. John's. They've done a lot of great work through the years for LA.
Yep.
And so you mentioned you came back from the Kamala campaign. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your role within the Kamala campaign and how that evolved.
It's interesting. I thought I was slowing my life down. I had sort of made the decision to that it was my time to sort of hand the mantle of leadership over at SEIU 2015 after 10 years of working with those members. And it was time for me to really focus on being a parent. And the senator who I met as a part of working on behalf of home care workers, we became really familiar, and she started to really think about whether she could make a difference in this election. And my firm, the firm that I joined after I left SEIU, SCRB Strategies, was historically the senator's political consulting firm. And so I was able to sort of join her team in overall effort as a senior advisor, national senior advisor. What I worked on initially was I put a lot of time and attention into South Carolina. Okay. As the sort of first primary of really diverse state. I wanted to make sure that the campaign was really doing everything that it could to introduce Senator Harris to South Carolinians and the leadership across that state. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the environmental issues that we in California can think are unique to California, whether it's the sort of Exide battery contamination in East LA. There are communities in South Carolina that are living with similar kinds of environmental devastation. A city by the name of Denmark, South Carolina, where kids every day going to school and drinking water out of lead pipes. Literally, the entire community is getting served bottles of water. And so I learned an incredible amount about some very special communities all over the country. South Carolina, I spent a lot of time in Nevada, really understanding the issues that are important to Nevada residents and what they were looking for in a presidential candidate. And by the end of the campaign, really had evolved from a sort of senior advisor that was just focused on a couple states to really being intimately involved in the sort of day-to-day operations of the campaign, whether it was staffing or budget, really trying to work with the in-house team to be as supportive as I could, given my experience running an organization of that size and scale. And we spent a lot of time with the senator as she was making her decision to suspend her campaign and really focus on she knew that she had the impeachment trial coming up and really felt like her constitutional duty was to represent Californians in that really historic moment in our country. And I thought she did a great job, and we'll see what else happens in her future.
Okay. Thank you. And so Kamala, she's, from my experience through 2015 in Southern California, she's always been very popular throughout the state. Mm-hmm. What failed to translate nationally?
I don't know if it was a failure to translate as much as it is a sort of uniqueness of this moment. There was a historic number of candidates in this race. 25 at the time that she started running. A number of them were national names that were already well known, and the senator spent a lot of her time having to introduce herself to the country. And this is a moment where the time that I spent with voters across the country, what people really wanted was somebody who could win. They just don't want to have to experience another 4 years of this president. Yeah. And so I think it's less. It was less an experience of not being able to translate or connect. The senator met any number of benchmarks that would be considered like outstanding in any other presidential contest. But I think this is a moment of hyper concern and really focusing on beating Donald Trump, and she had to continue to introduce herself. And so I think that the sky is the limit for her. There was so much support, whether it was the 22,000 people that came to Oakland at her launch, or the 2,000 people that showed up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. There was all kinds of excitement about her. Big shout out to the K Hive that exists in social media. They were awesome grassroots supporters. They've been were just incredible supporters and continue to be an active group online. And I am really excited about what Senator Harris has to offer the country in terms of her vision and her fight. And folks in California have had 25 years to get to know her. And she just has get a little bit more time to introduce herself to the rest of the country.
I'm excited. I think there's more to come from Kamala. I don't think she's done. She's so young. She's got plenty of fight. What was the biggest lesson you learned during the Kamala campaign, if there was one?
There were tons. One of the lessons, I think, as a leader of an organization, I think there's a lot of responsibility that's placed on the top person, the candidate, him or herself. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of responsibility that falls on the frontline organizers, the folks on the ground whose job it is to turn people out to events or to get political endorsements. And the lesson that I learned is that management in the middle, the quality of management in the middle, is so, so important. And I knew that from my experience at SEIU and running different operations, but I got a chance to have that lesson reaffirmed as it relates to sort of organizational design and leadership and how you really think about and build out teams. Mm-hmm. That level of, it really is an art to think about how to create a team, and doing that on the front end is really, really important. I guess another lesson that I learned that just everyday voters taught me, no matter what state I happen to be in, is that fear is a powerful force. And sometimes there are communities that get written off as apathetic or not engaged. And when you really sit in those living rooms and you talk with those voters, what really is happening in those communities, folks are just paralyzed by the fear of what could happen with their family's future, and they are so focused on creating the best opportunity that they can, that some of the intellectual arguments that we have in the Democratic Party, they find just irrelevant to their everyday. And so electorally and sort of in politics, I learned that relevance is key, that fear is powerful, but that in order to really meet voters where they are, which is a cliche that every organizer, no matter what they're organizing for, that relevance is just incredibly important.
So how do we overcome that fear? You say people get paralyzed by it, but how do we overcome that?
Through inspiration. Mm-hmm. I think you look at then Senator Obama, who became President Obama, what he was masterful at was sort of connecting with all those things that we all have in common and calling us to our higher, better selves. We've spent, as a nation, the last 3 years having a leader who does not call us to that higher space, mm-hmm. but frankly begs us to the bottom, to meet him at the bottom. And so I think that a way that has been demonstrated electorally, I think with President Obama is that inspiration. And even when you look at community campaigns, whether it's issues like Compton or criminal justice reform or fighting for the minimum wage, it is that everybody wanted to be inspired by a aspiration that was sort of reaching. They knew their worth. They were worth more than $7.25 or $8 or $12. But they wanted to be inspired by, some group of people, by their own voices, in validating that they deserve to be paid more. And victories matter, small victories, whether it was the, small cities that came first, or larger cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles. Small
LA was
victories
first.
matter.
LA was first, just to clarify.
Those small victories matter. I think there are some smaller cities in Northern Cal that got the ball rolling, and when people saw what was possible, they're like, why not me, right? And so being called, I think, to a higher belief, I think is incredibly important to moving past that fear. I don't think we'll ever inspire people to vote for something by telling them what they're against. It's one of the challenges that I see currently is that our organizing messages are about those things that we ought to be afraid of, or those things that we ought to be angry about, as opposed to those things that we want to achieve for not only for ourselves but for our neighbors. I want $15 for me, but I also want $15 for my neighbor, and that will inspire me to talk to my neighbor. So that's what I think. Those are some of the things that I've learned. It's been an incredible journey and opportunity. A lot of it really grounded in the work that I've done with SEIU, and hopefully I can continue to add value to the lives of those members as they have added value to my own life.
So now let's kind of talk a little bit over to the labor side from the Kamala campaign.
Let's do it.
So coming from
great tacos.
Go for whatever you want. Coming from being the president of SEIU 2015, an organization which represents over 400,000 caregivers now in California. So how did it feel to take a step back from being the president of an organization where kind of everyone looked to you to be the woman behind the woman? For me, it was kind of strange when I saw you on the campaign trail walking behind Kamala, because I always seen you as the woman in front and everyone's walking behind you, staffing you, and you were walking behind. So how was that transition, or how did that feel? Fascinating.
Look, my decision to leave SEIU was a layered one. It had a lot to do with where I felt like I was in my own life, and my desire to be present for my daughter, and knowing that those members deserve a leader who can, where their livelihood is their number one focus. I just had gotten to a point in my own personal life where I needed to put my kid first, but I also hope that it was an example. So much of my time in the labor movement was looking to people in their 70s and who had been at their local unions for 30, 40 years. My intention was to acknowledge that my contribution had been significant and that it is okay to make room for others. Had I not left, there would have been no room for April to emerge as the next president, or for Derek Smith to move to an executive vice president. Had I not left, those opportunities would have been decades away for those folks who were ready to make valuable contributions for themselves. And so I wanted to live my truth. And be the example that I felt like was missing. That it's okay to leave. That you can have a life and you can have significant impact without holding on to positions for 25, 30 years. And so to your question about what was it like to then be in the supporting cast of someone else's story. Look, I think that life is about knowing how to play a lot of positions. One of the most valuable lessons that I've had and refer to a lot in my own leadership is being on a team. I played basketball as a kid. And I had a number of coaches who really emphasized the importance of working together and working with others. And I always used to say at SEIU, you don't win a championship with 5 point guards. everybody has a role to play. Everybody has a time to play their role. Not everybody is in the game all at once. And so my time at SEIU gave me an opportunity to play a lot of different positions. It gave me an opportunity to be on the court and in the game and shoot my shot. And then I had to learn how to play a different position. And I'm grateful to Senator Harris for giving me the opportunity to learn how to play different positions. I said in a radio spot where somebody asked me a very similar question. At the time, one of the lessons I really was grappling with, and I'm grateful that I got an opportunity to learn, is, to your point, what is it like to not be the person in power or having authority? And learning a lesson between authority and influence and how to use them both, I think, is also a valuable tool that one should have in their toolbox.
Maybe you could talk, what's the difference between authority and power? Like, how would you differentiate the two?
Look, as a leader of the union, I had the authority granted to me by the members of the union and the executive board to make decisions and execute on their behalf. I didn't have to didn't have to convince someone else.
You were right. You just had to know you were right.
I just had to get a conversation going with our members. And these Monday morning calls that every week, it was about building consensus across the union, not only with the members, but also with the staff. But once we had consensus, I could direct direct the strategy. I could direct the tactics. And we were sort of off and running. And whenever I had there was a change in plan, I always sort of came back to the members and said, hey, this is what's happening. This is the way that I think we should go. What do you guys think? And I experienced that really as having the authority and responsibility to execute. Now, this notion of influence, right? That's a different thing. With Senator Harris in particular, she had to make the decision. It's her name that's on the sign, not mine. It's her face that is on the screen. And frankly, it's her reputation and credibility that she is offering to the country, not mine. And so what I needed to learn how to do was not to direct or to sort of organize the process by which we got to consensus. My job was to give her my advice and try to build my case such that I was able to influence the decision that she ultimately made. And so it's a different thing. It's a different rhythm. Definitely, it's a different rhythm. Influence takes a lot longer.
Yeah. A lot of patience, I'd imagine.
A lot of patience has to come along with influence. And I'm, again, grateful for the opportunity to be able to sharpen those skills and develop those skills.
And so, with kind of the labor movement we were talking about, so what role do you see the labor movement playing in the future of, I guess, progressive politics?
Look, I think the labor movement will continue to be critical to creating a more just society. And I choose my words carefully, intentionally. I think that the more divisive language we use, the more partisan language we use, the deeper the divide becomes. There are people who identify as Democrats who don't identify as progressive. And their voice should be validated too. And so I think that the labor movement are full of members who don't even identify as Democrats. And their voices should be validated too. And so I think that in order to inspire people to become engaged in creating a more just society, we have to create room even with our language, to make sure that they feel like there is a place for them to participate. And I think that the labor movement will be critical in that. There are working families all over this country who joined the union to create more just societies in their workplace and in their communities. And I think that the more the labor movement is able to embrace all voices in their membership, but all voices in their communities, in the communities in which the members sort of work and live, that they will continue to be powerhouses in politics and in creating change. One of the things that I felt like SEIU 2015 was really good at, because of the uniqueness of the work that our members did, was to see our members as whole people. They didn't go to a factory to go to work, right? Mm-hmm. They went to work in somebody's home. And so their workplace safety meant something very different, right? It meant that they needed to have safe sidewalks. It meant that they needed to have stop signs. And you mm-hmm. remember these fights. I remember Mario Torres in Salinas, was one of his first events as a leader in the union was to organize his neighbors to get a stop sign put up in their community where so many young people had been hit by cars that were speeding down the street. And so the power of the union is not in my opinion, is not just in it's not just in training people to be leaders on behalf of the labor movement. It is really about, I think, creating opportunity for people to see and actualize their own leadership, and then take that and use it to change their communities. And so, in that way, in terms of creating a more just society, the labor movement will continue to be a strong voice for, of course, wages and benefits, and of course, social mobility and economic fairness. And I think that there's so many more crises that are facing the next generation of workers, whether it's the environment or racial justice. I think those are also places where the labor movement will also be critical in creating those conversations in that space for leadership.
So what are some of the biggest mistakes right now that the labor movement is making that's holding them back from, the results that they want to see? Yeah,
it's interesting. I don't think that they're making big mistakes. I think, I'm only a year removed from the labor movement, and I don't see big mistakes. I think that the labor movement today is being bold. It's making big demands. That $15 an hour minimum wage, people thought that was crazy, right? And so, but now it's like the norm, right? And so I think the boldness of the labor movement is right on. They are taking on this emerging technology economy with things like AB5 and other efforts in organizing, quote unquote gig workers and fast food workers and retail workers. And I think that the labor movement their boldness and their ideas right now are right on. What I think that I could have done better as a labor leader is engaging young workers, empowering the voices and leadership of young workers. If we don't invest in my own reflection, if I'm not investing in the youngest of our activists, I am participating in the staleness of our leadership. And so I think that in order to continue to be bold and to continue to have big vision and big ideas, we've got to empower and engage those young leaders who are already thinking about the next generation of fights and the next generation of justice.
And then on our next generation of leaders, within the movement, if you were talking to them to inspire them about like how critical this time is right now, and sometimes they're starting off, maybe they're an organizer on the front line, and they don't see 20 years from now how they've come up, and I've been in the movement personally for like 10 years now, and it's amazing to see all the people that I kind of began with are coming into these leadership positions, and it's it's really amazing to see. So maybe you can talk a little bit to our next generation of leaders and give them a little bit of inspiration.
It's a great question. I think not a lot of time and attention really is paid to developing that next generation of leaders, not with the intention with which they deserve. So if I had to give that next generation of leaders some advice, that'd be probably, demand your space at the table. People do a lot of, leaders who've been around for a long time do a lot of lip service, or they relegate young leaders to, oh, well, you can be the digital organizer, or you can be the social media person,
right?
But never really trusted to give real authority and decision making to. And so, like, I would say to young leaders, like, don't be quiet until you have a real place at the table. I wish I had done a lot more of that as I was growing up in SEIU. The other piece of advice that I would give to young leaders is seek first to understand before being understood. Old advice that's been around forever, but it is important, I think, for the future of our democracy and for the justice that we all seek to create, that we take the time to understand one another's journey and our walk and our experiences and our differences. And that we, as much as we celebrate the things that we have in common, the things that we don't have in common are just as valuable. And without understanding that and knowing where someone is coming from, it's easy to sort of pop off into the next big argument or the next thing that divides our community. And I think that we've got to intentionally try to understand that we are alike and that we are different, and celebrate both.
Kind of coming back a little bit to Kamala. Mm-hmm. So my theory is when she stepped out, right, is that when Biden, if he were to win, that she would be the VP for him. What do you think about that?
Anything is possible. Here's the thing that I know about Senator Harris.
Yeah.
She didn't run for president to be anybody's vice president. She ran for president because she thought she had a vision for the country that was one where people could belong, and that we could fight for the best of who we are. Now, would she make a great vice president? Absolutely. She would make a fantastic vice president. She would make a fantastic attorney general. We've had her as attorney general in California. We know what she is capable of. I am holding out hope that, whatever is the next Democratic administration, that she's a part of it.
Okay. Excellent. And so we're kind of coming down to the end of the questions. In general, these are kind of a little bit more personal questions.
Sure.
So what inspires you these days? Like,
my daughter inspires me these days. And she's the only child. She is fiercely independent and opinionated and sort of strong-willed, at the same time very kind and caring. I always sort of think that she's the leader that Nelson Mandela refers to in his book, A Long Walk to Freedom. She's the leader who knows how to lead from the front, but but she also knows how to lead from the back. And it's great to sort of see her with her little friends and in her little community, be the kid who can lead everybody to the playground, but also be the kid who makes sure that nobody gets left behind.
So, as a father as well as a 5-year-old, so what do you do to help teach your daughter leadership skills and kind of the skills that you want her to have moving forward?
Yeah, I affirm what is already there. It's fascinating. I'm sure you experience this as well. It's fascinating to see what is already in there, and sort of see when it sort of shows up, be amazed. But then I think our job is to sort of nurture those things. So when she has an opinion about what she wants to do or what she wants to wear, I don't tell her, no, you can't wear that. I might have a conversation with her about why you don't want to wear shorts when it's 55 degrees. Mm-hmm. We can have a logical conversation.
55 for Los Angeles is cold. Okay.
Exactly.
Really, that's freezing.
Exactly. So, I just feel like my job is to strengthen what's already there, to affirm her voice, to be a protector when she needs it, and to, be an observer when that's needed too. And like figuring out how to be what she needs at any given moment is really, I think, the hard part. Mm-hmm. Is really, really the hard part about being a parent. And who knew? I had no idea what it was like. And I always sort of criticize my mom. You didn't do this. You didn't tell me that. Blah, blah. It's like, yeah, it is really hard.
Just do the best you can.
Do the best you can. But she is such an inspiration for me because it's why when I left SEIU, at the peak of my career, folks might have described, I took the opportunity to, instead of going off and doing any number of different things, I chose to work for Senator Harris. It's like I owed my daughter the opportunity to see a Black woman as the President of the United States. And if she ever does it again, I think my daughter and every other person's person of color in particular, who has a daughter, even those who have a son, as I actually think about it, like acknowledging the fact that Black women can lead and lead in a way that is compassionate, but also very firm, can be a fighter and be a diplomat. I felt like I owed her that opportunity. And so she inspires a lot of how I think and a lot of what I do, and I just try to be the best parent I can be and not screw up that sort of natural, those natural talents that she already has.
That's great. Beautiful. I think this was probably the last one before we're gonna have just a quick lightning round after.
All right,
just quick, get to know
lightning.
the truth.
I can do lightning.
Okay, this is the last personal question. What's different about how you approach your work as a Black LGBTQ woman and how others who don't belong to these groups approach their work? And is there a difference?
I don't know. I can't speak to other people's sort of journey and experience without engaging them meaningfully in what that means to them. I know what those identities mean for me. As it relates to like my responsibility to other Black women or Black LGBT women, and in places of leadership, you are never not a Black woman, and whereas you might not know that I am in a relationship with a woman, but I can never not be Black. And so that is something that I think is an incredibly important part of my identity and responsibility to other Black women, and frankly, my community writ large, is to make sure as a leader I'm showing up with the grace and dignity that other Black women deserve. I know that when I'm in a room of mostly not people who look like me, particularly when that was my experience and in the labor movement, I had to represent all of those women and bring all of those women to the table. And that was the beauty of representing the women that I worked for. It's a real point of pride to work for so many women and women of color who were members of SEIU 2015. And the labor movement is a place that is, as I've said before, and someone, Andy Stern, used to describe the labor movement as male, stale, and pale. Mm-hmm. And that was absolutely my experience. And so being a Black woman in that space, with the authority that I had on behalf of mostly women of color, was an incredible responsibility. And it informs how I show up. It informs the decisions that I make. It informs like the words that I choose. Making sure that those women, as I said, are represented with the dignity that they deserve. And so as that relates to somebody else's experience, I don't know. I think we all have different experiences. You can put me and another Black lesbian side by side, and we would have a different journey. And so I feel like my responsibility is to not have judgment about theirs, but to inform them of mine.
All right. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to move on to a quick little lightning round. You can kind of give me some short answers, quick answers.
Yep.
All right. The truth, nothing but the truth. All right. Donuts or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Who's the funniest person you know?
My daughter.
What subjects did you hate in school?
Spanish and PE.
Your favorite sports team?
The Celtics.
I'm sorry you said that. Go Lakers. Long live Kobe. Respect. Moment of silence for Kobe.
A moment of silence.
Okay.
All right, what else you got?
Favorite athlete?
Favorite athlete, Bill Russell.
Favorite musical artist or band?
Yolanda Adams.
Favorite video producer and photographer?
Chris Olivarez.
Perfect. What's the best part about being a mom?
The different things that can happen in any moment.
The excitement. What annoys you?
What annoys me? Lateness.
I noticed that when you showed up, I'm like, Laphonza's on time. Of course she's on time. Of course she's on time. What's your favorite curse word?
See, this was one of the things that the senator and I actually have in common. It is a word that begins with F and ends in K. Okay. It's my favorite curse word.
Okay. How many days can you wear jeans before washing them?
Oh, a solid 3.
Solid 3. Okay.
In a row?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, solid 3.
Solid 3.
Solid 3.
Solid 3. Okay. What's a good book you recently read?
There's a book by a guy, Woodfox, Alfred Woodfox, who spent 40 years in solitary confinement in Angola prison, penitentiary. And I just finished it. It's called Solitary, actually. And it was, I think, an incredible read for anyone who is interested in criminal justice reform and the tortures that it creates. There's no rehabilitation in 40 years of solitary confinement.
Mm-hmm. Wow. If you could have dinner with anyone from history, who would it be?
Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou. What are your top 3 core values? Your personal core values.
My personal core values are integrity, honesty, and objectivity.
Do you believe in ghosts?
No.
Okay. And I think that concludes our podcast for today.
Those are great questions. I gotta say you changed them up, but that was good. That was good. I appreciate it. This was great, and great tacos.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank you so much for taking your time to be here. I just want you to know, when we first thought about the idea of the podcast, I was thinking, who's the one person that inspires me, that, you know, as a person, not only their position, but the way they carry themselves and the way they treat others. You're the first person that comes to mind. So I wanted to thank you for being here and taking your time to be here.
It matters a lot. You are an incredible talent, and not much I wouldn't do for you, brother. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And anything I can do for you in the future, please, you know.
You got it.
I got you.
You got it.
And when Kamala becomes president of the United States and she needs a presidential photographer.
You're first on the list.
Boom! You guys heard that. All right. I'll clean up. I'll shave.
Her decision to make.
But you're good at influence. You got that influence. I'll shave if I need to. All right. Thank you so much, Laphonza.
Of course. Thank you, guys.